They told her they would kill her children if she did not surrender. Caterina Sforza stood on the battlements of her fortress, lifted her skirts in defiance, and shouted back, "Kill them if you wish. I have the mold to make more."
This was the woman the world would come to call the Tiger of Forlì. In a Renaissance Italy dominated by men, popes, and princes, Caterina Sforza didn't just survive. She fought, she experimented, she ruled. She was the illegitimate daughter of a duke, the niece of a pope, and the mother of one of history's greatest generals. But she was never defined by the men in her life. Instead, she defined herself through blood, iron, and a fierce, unyielding intellect.
To understand the tiger, we have to go back to Milan, 1463. Caterina was born out of wedlock to Galeazzo Maria Sforza, the Duke of Milan. In many other families, this would have meant a life of quiet obscurity. But the Sforzas were different. They were condottieri, mercenary captains who had seized power through sheer force. They valued strength and wit over lineage. Caterina was raised in the glittering, dangerous court of Milan, receiving the same education as her brothers. She studied Latin, Greek, and philosophy, but she also learned how to handle a sword, how to hunt, and how to command.
By the age of 10, she was a political pawn. Her father betrothed her to Girolamo Riario, the nephew of Pope Sixtus IV. It was a match designed to cement an alliance between the Sforzas of Milan and the papacy in Rome. At 14, she was sent to Rome to live as a bride, stepping into a world of ecclesiastical intrigue and high-stakes politics. Most teenage girls would have been overwhelmed. Caterina thrived. She became a favorite at the papal court, navigating the treacherous waters of Roman society with a grace that masked a growing ambition.
But the first true test of her mettle came in 1484. Pope Sixtus IV died, and Rome descended into chaos. Mobs looted the city, and the Riario palaces were attacked. Her husband, Girolamo, was a man of weak character, hesitant and fearful. While he hovered outside the city walls with his army, unsure of his next move, Caterina acted. 7 months pregnant, she mounted a horse, rode to the Castel Sant'Angelo, and seized the fortress in her husband's name.
She pointed the castle's cannons at the Vatican and told the College of Cardinals that they would not hold a conclave to elect a new pope until her husband's rights were guaranteed. For 12 days, she held the most powerful men in Christendom hostage. She only surrendered the fortress when her husband reached a deal, one that she felt was a mistake. She was right. The new pope, Innocent VIII, was no friend to the Riarios. The couple was forced to retreat to their lands in the Romagna, the cities of Forlì and Imola. It was a step down from the power of Rome, and the locals were less than welcoming. Girolamo was a poor ruler, heavy-handed and unpopular. In 1488, the inevitable happened. A group of conspirators known as the Orsi family broke into the palace, stabbed Girolamo to death, and threw his body out a window. They took Caterina and her children captive. The conspirators needed the fortress of Ravaldino to secure the city, but the Castellan refused to surrender unless he heard the order from Caterina herself. She convinced the Orsi to let her enter the fortress, leaving her children as hostages, promising she would return and order the gates opened. Once she was behind the thick stone walls, she climbed the ramparts and unleashed a torrent of insults on her captors. When they threatened to kill her children, she gave the famous response that has echoed through history. She knew they wouldn't kill the children. Dead hostages were useless, and she had the Sforza army from Milan already on the way. She retook her city. She executed the conspirators. She hung their bodies from the windows where her husband had been tossed. At 25, Caterina Sforza was no longer just a wife. She was the regent of Forlì and Imola, ruling on behalf of her young son.
For the next decade, Caterina governed with an iron fist. She lowered taxes to gain the favor of the common people, but she was brutal toward any sign of rebellion. She personally oversaw the training of her militia and the strengthening of her fortifications. But there was another side to her that the history books often overlook. While she was a warrior on the ramparts, she was a scientist in her private chambers. Caterina was obsessed with alchemy and medicine. She spent years compiling a book titled Gli Esperimenti, or The Experiments. It wasn't just a collection of beauty tips, though it did include recipes for creams and perfumes. It was a serious scientific journal. She recorded formulas for poisons, cures for the plague, ways to create gold, and techniques for preserving food. She corresponded with the best chemists of the age. In her mind, the power to heal and the power to kill were two sides of the same coin, and she mastered both.
Her personal life was just as turbulent as her politics. She married again in secret to Giacomo Fio, a man of lower birth. She loved him passionately, but he grew arrogant and was eventually assassinated by jealous courtiers. Once again, Caterina's revenge was swift and terrible, involving the execution of entire families associated with the plot. Her third marriage was to Giovanni de' Medici from the famous Florentine family. It was a union of love and power, and it produced a son, also named Giovanni, who would grow up to be the legendary commander known as Giovanni delle Bande Nere. But the winds of Italian politics were shifting. In 1492, a Borgia, Rodrigo Borgia, became Pope Alexander VI. He had a vision to carve out a kingdom in central Italy for his son, Cesare Borgia. To do this, he needed to sweep away the petty lords of the Romagna. He declared Caterina's rule illegitimate and sent Cesare at the head of a massive French and papal army to take her cities. One by one, the cities of the Romagna fell. Imola surrendered without a fight, but when Cesare reached Forlì, he found the gates barred. Caterina had moved her supplies, her soldiers, and herself into the fortress of Ravaldino. She sent her children to safety in Florence and prepared for a siege. The siege of Forlì in 1499 was a clash of titans. Cesare Borgia was the most feared man in Italy, backed by the power of the Pope and the King of France. Caterina Sforza was a lone woman in a stone box. Cesare offered her honorable terms. She replied by attempting to blow up his emissaries with hidden mines. Cesare began a relentless bombardment, his heavy cannons screaming day and night. Caterina walked the walls in full armor, encouraging her men, even when the walls began to crumble. She held out for weeks. The bravery she showed earned the respect of the French officers, who were stunned to see a woman leading a defense with such ferocity. But the odds were impossible. On January 12, 1500, the walls were finally breached. The fighting moved into the courtyard, then into the keep. Caterina fought with a sword until she was physically overwhelmed. Under the laws of the time, the French refused to take a woman prisoner. They viewed it as beneath their honor. But Cesare Borgia had no such qualms. He claimed her as his prize. He took her back to Rome in golden chains, a trophy of his conquest. She was imprisoned in the Vatican, and later in the dungeons of Castel Sant'Angelo, the very fortress she had seized years before as a young bride. The Pope accused her of attempting to poison him with a letter infected with the plague. She spent a year in darkness, her health failing, her power gone. But Caterina was a survivor. Through the intervention of the French, who still admired her courage, she was released. She was forced to sign away her rights to Forlì and Imola and was sent to Florence to live in exile.
Her final years were spent in the quiet gardens of the Villa Medici, focusing on her children and her alchemical experiments. She watched as her son Giovanni grew into a warrior who would carry on the Sforza ferocity. She died in 1509 at the age of 46, succumbing to pneumonia.
Caterina Sforza's legacy isn't just one of battles and blood. She was a woman who refused to accept the limitations placed upon her by the era she lived in. In a world where women were meant to be silent spectators, she was a protagonist. She was a ruler who protected her people, a mother who fought for her children's inheritance, and a scientist who sought to unlock the secrets of nature.
Centuries later, her grandson, Cosimo I Medici, would become the first Grand Duke of Tuscany, ensuring that the blood of the Tiger of Forlì flowed through the veins of European royalty for generations. She was the embodiment of the Renaissance spirit, brilliant, brutal, and utterly unforgettable. They called her a virago, a term meant as an insult to describe a woman who acted like a man. But Caterina didn't act like a man. She acted like a Sforza. She lived life on her own terms, and even when she lost her lands, she never lost her soul.
If you want more stories of history's most fearless figures, subscribe now.